of us that became the head coach at Xavier, you always tried to take it for where you got it and say, what is it that I can do to move this thing forward? That's become increasingly more difficult as now we're in the Big East and the success of the past has been attained at so many different levels. I mean, Chris did arguably what I think is the hardest thing to do in college basketball, and that is be a 1 seed. You're a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. That's reflective of a 32-game, 6-7 month years of recruiting to be one of the top 4 seeds of 370 teams.
This is the Sean Miller Podcast, presented by Deer Park Roofing. Now, here's your hosts, Paul Fritchner and Adam Baum.
Welcome back to the Sean Miller Podcast. Paul Fritchner, Adam Baum, the head coach of the Xavier Musketeers, Sean Miller, and to my right, a very special guest, joined by the former head coach of the Xavier Musketeers, Chris Mack. To my right, Chris, happy birthday. Thank you for being here today.
It is your birthday today, huh?
It is.
Wow.
It is. Tiger Woods, LeBron James, Jalen Reynolds, and me.
Chris Mack.
That's quite the crew.
Well, thanks as always to Deer Park Roofing, our presenting sponsor, for helping make this show possible. And thank you to each and every one of you that have listened to this show already through the first 10 episodes. This episode number 11, make sure you follow us on social media at Sean Miller Pod. You subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. But Chris, it's great to be here. It's great to see you back here at the Cintas Center. It's great to have you here in the building. And just for people that are watching that maybe don't know where you are right now or what you've been up to over the last few years, you have an opportunity to be with your daughters and your family and your son, and both of your daughters playing volleyball, and one of your daughters, the first volleyball commit to Vanderbilt and starting their program. So congratulations to her. But we'd just love to hear where you are right now and how everything's going for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the last 6-7 months, we've been down in Florida as permanent residents. We've always had a second home there. Coach and his wife, Amy, came down for a weekend a couple of years ago, and so we've enjoyed that. You know, I've been following, both of my daughters are out of the house. Haley, who you mentioned, who's committed to Vanderbilt, is actually playing at IMG Academy. So it's an hour north of us in Bradenton. And then my oldest daughter, Lainey, is a freshman at Flagler College in St. Augustine, Florida, which is premier city in the country. I mean, just an incredible time if you ever are in that area. I mean, wow, big tourist attraction type of city. And she started all year playing volleyball, and she's a setter. So, yeah, I've been watching them and just spending time with my son and my wife and doing a little bit of Field 68, picking up for Coach Miller's absence.
That's right.
And
I'm anxious to talk to you about that.
I'm sure you are. But, yeah, we've just a lot of volleyball.
How's the fishing?
Fishing's great. I can go on either side, go to the inlet, go to the Gulf. And I'm getting tips from my maintenance guy in terms of what I can keep and fillet and cook. And so it's been great.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Coach, what's it like for you being here? Obviously, you guys go way back. I mean, coaching, you hired Chris under his first staff back here at Xavier. And Chris, you were at Wake Forest before you were here at Xavier and played here for so much history. But to go all the way back to the beginning and now to be here like this, what is this like for you and to be here talking to each other like this?
In one way, I think it, when you're a younger coach, the way I would frame it is this. When you're a younger coach, you tend to really listen to what the older coaches say, guys that have been through it and maybe are 20, 25 years ahead of you in life. And, they almost always give you something like, you just don't know yet, wait. And I think coming full circle as we're here, Chris and I are kind of that guy now. Not that we're at the very end, not that we're at the end of the rainbow, but I think that you look and say there's a lot of experiences that you go through, a lot of great experiences, but in life and in sports, there's also obstacles and different things that hit you, and you work through it and overcome it. But I think as we're here full circle, God, it's a much different picture than it would have been, let's say, 20 years ago when you're young and you're like, hey, we're at Xavier, let's go, right? You almost don't know what's going to happen until it does. But I think that's, for me, when I think about us being here where we are in life in this situation, it's amazing when you're in college sports at this level, the different experiences that happen, and I think like you start to become one of those guys that should be giving advice, not just asking anymore. Sure. You feel that way at all?
Yeah, I just go back to like when I first interviewed with Sean, which was 2004, somewhere around there, 5. And I knew of Sean. I didn't really know him. Obviously, he was a great player, followed his career, and I knew the staffs that he was on as an assistant at NC State and then here at Xavier with that, but I didn't really know Sean. And, he was a young head coach when he first arrived here, and we were all about the same age. We were all trying to, continue Xavier's tradition, and to sit here however many years later and all the experiences we've had, both good and bad. I remember our first year, we were getting booed, and then full circle to win the 4 games in 4 days, and then just sort of where it went from there. To look back is pretty humbling, and I hope I'm more in the middle of the rainbow than the end of the rainbow, Grim Reaper over there, but. Yeah, a lot of experiences that we've had, positive, negative, but it sort of shapes who you are.
Swann, what are some of the first memories that you remember when he talks about his interview and interviewing with you? What are some of the things that you remember from that?
Well, I would say a couple things with Chris. Number one is, he played the game. You could be a great coach and not play. But I think if you have played and played at a high level, you inherently have some things in your toolbox that I think can be really advantageous towards a college coaching career. Mm-hmm. And I thought that like the first thing that stood out is Chris could dunk the ball. He had a horrific knee injury. And if that didn't happen, he probably would have played. He's probably the type of guy who would have played in Europe or overseas for many, many years, But I think the first thing that stands out is he combines a love of the game, both playing, and then it translates into coaching, where he's supremely confident on the court. He's got a great command on the court as a coach, like whether it's tactical, feel for the players, being able to teach them. And I always go back to like, part of what I believe makes him a great teacher is that he was in their shoes. He was in the locker room. He played the game at a very, very high level. So I think that's one thing that stood out. And I think the other thing, and Chris, you could, add on to this, but, he loves Cincinnati. Like he's from Cincinnati. He grew up here. He ate the food. He's one of the people. He understood the crosstown shootout, and a lot of his best friends and his family, they're here. And think about it. I mean, he played here. He coached with Coach Prosser, played for Coach Gillen. I mean, was here. So you think about how long he's been at Xavier and the different things he was a part of. I thought he understood this place better than anybody. And also, I think he loved the Xavier for what it was, what it is, and, what it could be. So, when we became together on the staff, I mean, when you're working through recruiting, you're working through coaching, like he had like a unique skill set to make our program better because of who he is and his track record here in this city and at this place.
Yeah. He's a GCL guy, Coach,
St. X, yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Well, you say the Cincinnati. That's why I'm sitting here with the Bengals fan and the Steelers fan. Somebody had to sit in the middle.
Yeah, I don't know how we lost to those guys both times like that.
I'm going to be careful on this because now that I'm here, I mean, I'm Joe Burrow and I know what the Bengals mean to the city, and I really enjoy watching them. But I mean, I grew up in Pittsburgh, and it is what it is. I mean, it's just, I had a terrible towel in my backyard at 6 years old and imitated Lynn Swann. And I'm going to give you a great story, Chris.
Oh, God.
So I'm at Arizona. I'm the head coach at Arizona. You're in the Pac-12 tournament championship game. We're playing USC. We're lining up for the national anthem. I'm looking right at USC. Place is packed in Vegas, T-Mobile Arena. I look to my left, and in the first row, about 20 feet from me, is Lynn Swann, who at the time was the AD at USC. And I had about 10 seconds before the anthem was going to start. And do I go shake his hand? You know, I mean, what do I do? Plus, I'm the coach at Arizona. He's the AD at USC. So I leave the line. And I mean, I just was literally caught up in the moment. If I have 5 people that I would just be like, I can't believe I met you, Lynn Swann would be number one.
I get that.
Top 5, number 88. Yeah. So
He'd be a lot further down on my list, but, you know, I understand.
Now, I walked out of the national anthem line, and that's when we used to wear suits.
Right.
We're in the championship game. I'm the head coach at Arizona. We're getting ready to play USC. And I probably caught him off guard. I said, Lynn, Sean Miller, I grew up in Pittsburgh. You know, you were my idol. That's all I can say, man. I needed to shake your hand. And he said, John, it's so nice to meet you.
Probably why he isn't the AD anymore.
Said, it's great to meet you, too. I walked back. I couldn't concentrate at the national anthem. I barely could coach in the next 2 hours. And I remember thinking, like, I'm not going to let that moment ruin how I envisioned it, you know? But not that he needed to know it, Sean, but I was the coach. I'm like,
right.
from him. You know?
Look it up in the program.
There you go.
The Sean Miller Podcast is brought to you by our trusted friends at Deer Park Roofing. Protect what's important with Deer Park Roofing's industry-leading training, expert attention to detail, and responsive service. From commercial and residential replacements to roof repairs, gutters, and more, request a free estimate today at deerparkroofing.com. That's deerparkroofing.com.
Welcome back to the Sean Miller Podcast. I'm curious, Coach, what was it like being an assistant at the very beginning of Sean's head coaching career? What was he like as a head coach back then?
Really intense. I think that Sean was saying this before. You know, when I came back to Xavier, everything was familiar. You know, the arena. I was here with Skip, Cincinnati. You know, the hallway. Everything was familiar, except I didn't know Sean that well. And so you're not really sure what your head coach necessarily wants from you as an assistant. And he spelled it out, right? We had our philosophy book and talked about responsibilities and duties, and I got all that. But I'm talking like the day-to-day personality, you know, high energy, you know, what kind of, is he more analytical? I have to learn those things, you know, from Sean. And I think in the very beginning, like a lot of new head coaches, he was and still is very hands-on. You know, I think that when you go from being an assistant coach to being a head coach, you're so used to who you've been, where you're calling the recruits, you're running the drills, you're doing things, you're doing the scout. And when you become the head coach, not that you don't do those things, but you have to manage the people that are doing them. And so he was head down Harry, 1,000 miles an hour, and he was intense as it gets. I mean, whether we won or whether we lost, you know, he was watching tape up in his office until, you know, 1, 2 in the morning. And I watched tape, but as soon as the game's over, not when I was an assistant, but when I was the head coach, as soon as the game was over, I'm in a sports bar. I'm getting a couple beers, I'm relaxing, and it's like, I'll worry about that next opponent that night at 2 in the morning back at the house and then start figuring out what our practice plan is. But he wanted to analyze everything instantly. And so it made for some nights where I'd look at my wife, you know, after we lost, and she'd be up in the stands. And I said, we're going to be eating pizza up here and, you know, watching film until 1 and 2 in the morning and getting cussed out for a little bit.
But you're right. And
you still do that, don't you?
No, I don't. Not nearly as. One thing that's changed is, you know, you can work from anywhere. You know, I think part of what we all did back then is you had to congregate here. You had to watch the video or the film here because you didn't have the ability to be away from each other. You know, one of the things that I think is great now is you could be in your kitchen. You know, we could all be doing a version of what you described, but you don't have to be here together until 2 in the morning or 1:30 in the morning or whatever. But yeah, that's one thing, Chris, I'll tell you that I've certainly learned over the years, and I wish I would have many years ago let go a little more. And I think you learn that over time. But that goes into that category of you win, you're relieved, you lose, you die, and you reinvent yourself.
Yep.
And it's like if everything's that serious, at some point, I think no matter how hard you're working or how smart you're trying to be, or dotting the I's and crossing the T's, like that works against you. And I would say that for me, that eventually, to some degree, did me in, because you can only go that route for so long without things breaking, and really you start to break inside. You know, I think as you get older, you learn the value of, like you said, letting go and empowering an assistant coach. And it's like even underneath Out of Bounds, like I think you're one of the best to ever do it. I mean that, when your team takes the ball out under your basket. I think coaches that have coached against you, if they hear me say that, they would shake their head and say, yep. It's just like you're wired differently. I think you got a lot of that from Skip. And then I think it's your creative mindset and working for Skip, because I think he took that very seriously as we go. Yep. But I remember like talking about that a lot with you. But it was hard for me to let go, not because I didn't trust you, but because, like what you said, you're young and you want everything to go right, and you know what the easy solution in your mind is? Well, I'll kind of do it. Yeah. But what's unique about it is when I left and then you became the head coach, I could have predicted that you would be really good in that area, but sure enough, that's what happened. Like you were able to score at a level that not many head coaches can. And yet when you're working with me, we worked together, but in hindsight, I could have turned that over to you back then. And
right, but let me say this: like that was the initial impressions. I mean, don't think for a minute that like over our 5 years together that like I just sat on the side and watched Sean coach. I just mean in the very beginning stages, you have to earn trust as an assistant coach under the head coach. You have to learn his personality. I learned so much under this guy, and I'm not going to blow smoke, but the systems that he had in place, I had never really experienced before. Both as a player and as an assistant coach, and I learned a ton of basketball and whatnot from Skip, from Jim Cruz, from Pete Gillen. But the systematic approach in all areas, from recruiting to how we manage the office to summer camp to practice plans to scouting, was incredible. I think a part of that from you was probably Herb Sendek, who I was never around. But I like to be very organized, and that helped me immensely, especially when I became a head coach, to really know how I wanted to organize the program. But I learned all that, really from Sean.
You and I have talked about this, and I'd like to talk about Skip for a minute. We played Winthrop, and Mark, his son, was the coach, and that's the Skip Prosser classic that you guys had created before I came back, and but I think back to him, what a unique person, and I think that's the first thing you think about when you think of him. Not a lot of coaches that coach at this level for a long time does the person stand out right away, even more so than the coach himself, right? A lot of times, right or wrong, you almost think about, the name of a coach that he's been in the Final Four, he's won this or won that. Then you go to the type of person he is. With Skip, it's easy to start with the type of man, just like the person he was. And, you being around him at your age and watching him, and you and I were together when he passed away. Yeah. I can remember it like it was yesterday. But when you think back to your time with him, how do you describe, his uniqueness and who he was as a person, as a coach? Maybe even like things that you think about probably a lot even today that he gave you.
Yeah, I think that like until I became a head coach, Coach used to start his practices with he'd try to go in different places within the arena or the practice gym, whether it was having the players sit up in the stands, whether it was have the players go up to the, top of the Cintas Center, whether it was sit in the locker room with them, because he wanted things to be fresh. And his first 10 minutes or 15 minutes of addressing the team every day was never about basketball. It was never about basketball. It was about a history lesson. It was about an English writer. It was about history. It was amazing. Number one, you learned a lot, but to watch the players sort of be captivated. They're 18, 19 years old. You know, they're playing video games, and then for them to be able to sit down and intently listen as he shaped their lives was incredible to watch. You know, and so I feel forever grateful for Coach being able to take a chance on me as a high school girls coach to become director of operations for him, and you know, eventually have a coaching career all because of Skip. What's really interesting about Skip, to me, is everybody that you talk to, all opposing coaches, whether they're assistants, head coaches, they have nothing but good things to say about him. It's not because he passed away. They said it during that time.
Yeah.
While he was alive. Greatest guy. And let me tell you something. You could poll a bunch of people. There's a lot of people that don't like me. There's a lot of people that probably don't like him. Because in our business, it's so competitive. You lose a recruit to a guy, you know, you're like, somebody on your staff say, I cheated. You know, it becomes such a negative at times because it's such a competitive environment. And Skip had those issues too, but like every person to a man that I've ever run across.
Same.
So he's such a good person. And that you can't find that in college coaching, I don't think.
He had a saying, and I know he had these repetitive sayings.
Yep.
You could probably start rattling them off. The one that I remember is, you know, I think somebody asked him about, you know, why don't you play so-and-so more? Or, you know, when is so-and-so going to get a chance to play? Or, you know, et cetera. And he either tired of the question or this was his mindset. And he said, look, this isn't Halloween. You know, we don't all, like, you know, Halloween, you put on a costume and everybody gets candy. Right. We all win. And he said, you know, just because you have the uniform on, your costume, doesn't mean that you get to play. We're going to play the guys who deserve to play. And, you know, still to this day, when you think about it, it's hard as a coach. You have guys who are really working hard. You have guys you know one day will be good, but you just can't start them or play them as much right now. They're too young, not ready, need more development. And it's a difficult deal to pick your starters and how it works. But it was a great answer. I mean, it makes all the sense in the world. And I think sometimes to the outside world, it's like, hey, why don't you just put him in? Well, because we've practiced 60 times, and I think we have a great understanding of who should be doing what. This is how we do it.
Yeah, as a coach, you want to say, because we want to win, and we know who the best players on the team or in this environment, in this situation, are going to be based on seeing them every day in practice. But you know what? When I'm watching the Bengals, I was like, why don't you give this guy a chance? Why don't you put him in there? So we're all fans to some degree at some sport.
For sure.
The Sean Miller Podcast is proud to partner with Payroll Partners, where you're not just a number. That means providing a best-in-class HR and payroll experience that was built on award-winning technology and live support customer service with a dedicated payroll specialist who's just a phone call away. You shouldn't have to choose between technology and customer service. At Payroll Partners, you get both. Payroll Partners is locally owned and operated by a proud Xavier alum. For more information or to request a free demo, visit payrollpartners.net. That's payrollpartners.net. Welcome back to the Sean Miller Podcast. Now, both of you have played each other in the Sweet 16. And Chris, since it's your birthday and you are the guest on this show, we're going to start with you in 2017 in San Jose. Yeah. Xavier, a 2-point win over Sean Miller's Arizona Wildcats in that game. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you on this one and what you remember from that game and coaching against each other for the second time in the Sweet 16 in 3 seasons.
Yeah. The first thing I think of is how fortunate we were to get there. Xavier fans will remember, you know, we had some tough news when Edmund Sumner went down, and it's just, you know, we had lost 6 in a row. And what was once a sure NCAA tournament lock season was in the balance as we went to DePaul. And my goodness, beating DePaul and just, you know, you go on the road, it's hard enough to win. You have 6 games in a row that you've lost. Everybody's saying if you don't win, you're not going to the tournament. We thought when we won at DePaul that we were in, and then you find out later that we weren't. We won a couple in the Big East tournament. So just to have that road to get there, beating Maryland and Florida State, just felt fortunate to be there. And then, our guys, JP, Trayvon, Malcolm Bernard was huge that game. I don't know if he missed a shot. There was just such a belief as we went to the tournament, because while we were on that losing streak of 6 games, you felt the weight of the world every game going in, whereas I felt like our guys could finally play free and play for something instead of like losing something. And probably no greater example than the last 4 minutes when we come out of the TV timeout, we're down 7 or 8, and it's like, just play. Got to get stops and just play. We had some I've seen that. My daughters, put that on the DVR all the time, the last 4 minutes. So it's like I can have all those plays memorized, but like just.
It's interesting. I remember every play of every game. I don't remember we were up 7.
Of course.
I guess I blanked that out.
But,
is that true? We were up 7?
Yeah. And it's like, we go to the foul line because I think marketing goes over the back, and it could have been a chintzy call if you're an Arizona fan, and it's like clock stopped. You get an opportunity to go down there. Quentin Gooden gets caught in the air and then throws it backwards to Malcolm, who hits a 3. And at the time, it's like, all right, they cut it to 5. But just the sequence of events and how that, and then whatchamacallit's last shot, your best player.
Alonzo Trier.
Yeah, Trier's last shot was in and out. And so it was
It's funny,
great feeling.
I don't remember that either.
You have a selective memory.
Hours later,
Coach.
we get our asses handed to us by Gonzaga. So it was, but it was a fun run, and with some special guys, a really special group.
He always says he hates to coach against his friends. Is that? I assume you feel similar.
I mean, I don't like look forward to it. If that's what you mean, it's like. When we lost to Swann in the Sweet 16, obviously you're devastated for your team and you feel bad, but it's like I would rather have somebody that I really care about that is moving on, versus sort of a nondescript guy I don't know. It just eats at you. But, you're going to have connections, maybe not this close of a connection with who you play, but the coaching community is so close, and we run into each other all the time that you're going to play against friends, acquaintances, former assistants, things of that nature all the time.
I remember about that game, the San Jose Sweet 16 is, I deep down I never felt good, simply because we had already played you a couple seasons earlier in the Sweet 16, in the state of California. And it's like you have a couple guys who are young on that first team who are now your best players 2 years later. And it's like a do-over. And the familiarity with you guys and what we were doing, in my mind, isn't advantageous to the favorite. And the other part of it is, it's like, I'm watching the bracket, and who I think you were playing Florida State and whatever, and I'm like, there's no way we're going to end up playing Xavier again. I think if it was just once,
I felt the same way when I walked by Florida State, and when the teams were like walking by each other, going to the practice court.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
it was unreal. I've never seen a team that imposing.
But then I saw you guys beat Florida State, and it was almost like, God, we got to do this again. That's how I felt. I wish I didn't feel that way, but I thought, your zone defense, and you came up with it. Was it that year or a year earlier?
It was the year we played you the first time in Staples Center. Matt Stainbrook was a great player, not a great defensive player, very intelligent, smart, but had trouble moving his feet. We decided, sort of go with an unorthodox 1-3-1 and put him on the bottom just to keep our best rebounder.
Yeah, it was great.
Close to the basket.
Just a coaching perspective, it was really, really unique. And I was worried about you guys doing that. J.P. McCura is such a unique defensive player. We didn't have what I would call like a true point guard on that team. We had tough guys, combo guards, and then Parker Jackson Cartwright against the zone was smaller. And I was like, God, that zone. And sure enough, I thought you guys, when you put it up against us, you almost negated Lowry Markkinen to some degree.
A little bit.
I think that was a big part of it. And the other thing, Chris, from if we're talking basketball perspective, if you're a coach listening to us right now, your scheme with Trayvon Blewett, where you would always have him set a screen off the ball, but it was like a trick. It was like he's only setting it so that you would switch or get off his body, and the next thing you know, boom, he became the shooter. And we were aware of it, and I'm telling you, we overthought it because it was like, look, anytime Trayvon Blewett sets a screen, I don't want you to help. You just kind of stick on him because the play's for him. And then what you started to do in that game, I can remember like it was yesterday, well if they're never going to help, we'll just hit the cutter.
Right.
And that's what started to happen. I think it was a guy like JP coming off a curl, and there's nobody there, and he's shooting these layups. And I remember saying, I need a timeout to go practice, come back in an hour, fix a couple of things here. Yeah. But, at the end of the day, in the tournament, there's always two things that I think stand out. Most of the time, you win or lose not on the first shot, but on a second shot or like a loose ball play or something. It's not the set play you ran or the coach ran against you. It's a player making a play, or you give up a rebound and he quick pass. How many times have you seen that loose ball? Oh, pass to the corner, 3, game. Or it's a player rising to the top of his game. Yep. And at the end, you're like, oh, man, I didn't realize he had that many. And I thought Trayvon Blewett, in a Sweet 16 game of that magnitude, he took his game to the highest level. And but I will say this, when you beat us, it was a hard loss for our program and everything about it. But I did have the feeling you talked about, and I was like, you know what, at least these guys are moving on to the Elite Eight, and I'm happy for them. Yeah.
One thing it sticks out to me from that game that we haven't talked about is the last bucket from Swann O'Mara, that kind of over-the-top pass down to him.
High-low.
That high-low, yeah. And he kind of split a couple of guys and just laid it in. Yeah. And Swann O'Mara is somebody that always, to me at least, came off as this guy that was just quiet, unassuming, went about his business, but progressed from somebody that didn't get a lot of minutes his freshman and sophomore year, but was a tremendous asset to the team by his senior year, shot free throws exceptionally well, and then came up in the biggest moment in that game.
It was interesting because, we had a timeout right prior to that. And as the guys were walking back on the floor, I had given, we were huddled as assistant coaches, head coach, and okay, this is the play we're going to run. We go in the huddle, we tell them. As guys are dispersing, I start to say in my mind, like, it's too long developing. We need to go quick so we can go 2 for 1. So as they're walking out, I changed the play. I said, I can't remember the name of the play call, but it was a high-low, which allowed us to hit. Quentin cut to the corner, and quickly we're in the play. If they front or they're 3-quartered on the high side with Swann, because Trayvon's on the other side, or he's the passer, his man it will be pressed to him. He'll have if he can get open, and he'll have an ability to sort of throw the high-low pass, and that can only be 8-10 seconds, and then whatever happens on their end, at least we'll get the last shot. And so we roll the ball out, and if you remember, Quentin let it go almost to half court before he touched it, gave us the opportunity to have 2 for 1. Thankfully, we didn't need it, but I don't know if Swann knew that Markkinen was behind him and missed the ball by like this much. He almost stapled it on the glass, but Swann was huge his whole entire senior year for us. I mean, you're going to get overlooked when you have Hall of Famers like JP and Trey on the team, but Swann was huge not only in that game, but in the tournament in general.
Before we get to the game from 2015, I want to ask you about what ended up being your last game as Xavier's head coach of the Florida State game, because we talk about playing teams, the same teams in the NCAA tournament. Mm-hmm. Xavier, you put on, especially in the second half in those last 15 or so minutes.
It was like a clinic.
Yeah, one of the most exceptional offensive performances that Xavier, at least in recent memory, that it would stick out. And then to have to get matched up again in the NCAA tournament, the selection committee, and they can say forever that there's no storylines or whatever. But look, you put Florida State back in that bracket in that 8-9 game, and you win the first game as a number 1 seed, but you get matched up with Florida State again in the same kind of vein as what we were just talking about. What was that like?
Well, it's interesting because, so much of what we got against Florida State the first time when we won, by a large margin was because they didn't switch their 5 on so many actions, whether it was a ball screen, whether it was an off-the-ball screen, and there were some things that we could do where we knew the 5-man would sort of be in trouble based on him never switching. Leonard completely flipped that the next year. They started switching 1 through 5 everywhere on the floor and have done that all the way up until now. And that hurt us it didn't allow some of our set plays to be as effective as maybe they were the year before because you didn't know who was going to be matched up with who. The other thing, and I'll go back to this, and I know Xavier fans will support me in this, J.P. Macura's fourth foul was complete baloney. I mean, we were, I think, up 9, if I'm not mistaken, with about 7.5 minutes left. And we were in the 1-3-1, and their best player had the ball at half court, didn't see JP. He's a little bit past half court. And JP knocked it from him like he normally does and took a dribble, and he was already crossing half court. He had a layup by 30 feet, and the referee called the foul at that point. Put them at the line, a 1-on-1. It was JP's fourth foul. Lead goes to 7, and now it's a different feeling rather than being up 11 with arguably your best player that night on the floor still and feeling good to now he's on the bench for at least 3 or 4 minutes, only up 7. That one will haunt me for a long time.
Yeah. All right, Sean, now you go back to 2015, the Staples Center, Los Angeles. That was the Matt Stainbrook Xavier team. But for you in the Sweet 16, what was that game like for you to be on the winning end of that?
I mean, it was great. That's what it's all about. But look, I knew that those guys had a great season, and we had a chance to win a national championship, and we had that type of team, and I knew it was going to be a really difficult game. So, a couple things. One, Coach Mack here had Matt Stainbrook shoot a 3-point shot on the first play of the game. So I knew that he was playing games with me in my mind. Because,
that's interesting. That's interesting. I know. That's interesting that you remember
he did
that
on purpose, because it's like he doesn't shoot threes and look at him. He's going that let it fly mentality, and and look, that's the part of the tournament. Heavy favorite, pressure of the world. You got better
trying
get
to put
the
more
Final
pressure
Four.
on.
Are you ever going to get to the Final Four? And this 7-footer heaves the 3 in and out. I remember thinking, oh God.
But we tried.
So that's one, and number 2. One of my favorite players that I've coached during my time is T.J. McConnell. And, on that team, if you would have pulled NBA general managers and opposing coaches, everyone would have said, boy, I love the way he plays. He's clearly your team's heart and soul. But I don't think anybody in their right mind could say he's going to play in the NBA for 12 years, potentially lead the NBA in steals in a year, and, be one of the most popular, backup second unit players in the last decade of the NBA. And he's still playing, right? So know this, that back then on game night, it wasn't like we thought of him in those terms. But in my mind, I really believed in him, And the one thing about TJ is he would always have a chip on his shoulder. It's what drives him to who he is today. He doesn't believe in me, watch this, This guy did this, watch this. And it's how he's wired. So I brought him in before we played Xavier, and I said, TJ, I want to tell you something. Coach Mack is one of my good friends. He's a heck of a coach. I think you know this now. We're in for a war, right? He didn't think you were good enough to play for Arizona. I want to let you know that. I called him. I asked him. Number 1, he didn't think you were tough enough. I made that up. Number 2, I don't think he thought you could shoot the ball. I don't know if he thinks in a game like this that you're wired to win.
No wonder he didn't shake my hand in the post-game line.
And I just said, this might help me 2%. There's no chance that me doing this is going to hurt at all. It probably helped more than that, because between that and J.P. Macura just, talking to him the whole game, he's one of those guys, and J.P. is like that as well, I think. It just brings
Feeds
out
off
the
the
best
challenge.
in him. Yeah. So I remember thinking, I might as well take advantage of that. Yeah. And Coach, if you remember, we all get things right or wrong. You were one of my first calls, and I'm like, tell me about this guy, T.J. McConnell. And I think it's not like you said he couldn't play, but I think you would say he's good, but would he be good enough to be the starting point guard at Arizona?
Yeah.
Right?
You don't want that. You don't want that on you. I don't want to see a guy there the next year that's struggling, and I endorsed him. Obviously, TJ, we played against him, and he was a terrific player. He's hard to handle. He didn't back down from Holloway when he was a freshman, so you knew he could play. Whether he's going to be all Pac-12, certainly a 10-year-plus NBA player, no idea that would happen.
But I bring that up because as I think back to that first Sweet 16, he was the difference.
Yeah.
He made big shots at the end, and it was a battle. I mean, we could have lost. I can make the case that we had we had a better chance of losing that first one than the second one if you go throughout how both games felt.
Right.
It just one changed at the end, and the other one we hung in there and made plays. But the fact that, you know, I'm at Arizona, way out there, and we're going through the tournament at 2 different times. We're in the Sweet 16. It's really one of the most remarkable things of this story, that, you know, that the connection that it stayed connected for sure.
The thing I remember about that, and I remember it happened in the second game too when we played. We could not get a rebound out of our zone. You know, as effective as I thought the zone was and gave them issues at times, when the shot goes up, you're not really responsible for your man. You're responsible for a man in your area. And if there are multiple guys opposite when the shot goes up, it's like, who am I blocking out? The 6'9" guy here, the 6'5" guy here. And, you know, we could not get a defensive rebound a lot of the time to give them second possessions or second chance points that, you know, ultimately did us in. But Sean's right. Like, I think that game, you know, we had the lead at least in the first half. And the second half was sort of going back and forth. Well, I felt like outside of one run, the second time we played, you know, we were playing from behind a large majority of the second half. But,
you know, game pressure is
sure.
something that I've learned to talk a lot about, because I think it's so true. Game pressure.
Yeah.
You know, the heavy favorite, the closer it gets to the end, to some degree it works to their advantage. That's why they're the favorite. But it depends on the circumstances. Sometimes it can work to the disadvantage, you know?
Yeah, and I think that, like, you know, for us, that was a big part of it. First, if we can make it a 4-point, 5-point game with 6-7 minutes left, they'll realize, oh my goodness, we might lose this.
That's right.
And that's, you know, that shortens the game up for your guys. You know, it doesn't put the pressure of you have to be up, you have to be winning. You don't have to. You have to make it a game so that they know it is down the stretch.
And I think that's one of the keys to the tournament. Like, can you unleash your group, your team, your best players to play free, to have confidence in a good way, to not feel that game pressure in a negative way.
Correct.
But to actually allow that to bring out the best in them. And I think that, you know, some teams, programs, maybe even coaches are better at that than others. But, you know, no doubt the tournament, and that's what makes college basketball so special. It's what we're talking about right now. You can literally recite plays, strategies, and points from 2 separate games that happened some time ago. You know, and so can I.
The Sean Miller Podcast is brought to you by Deer Park Roofing, and their company motto is protect what's important. Deer Park is not just another storm-chasing roofing company. They're invested in your community and truly care about the people in it. You can trust them to do the job right. Deer Park has highly trained professional technicians who make sure your residential or commercial roofing system is installed correctly and quickly. For a free estimate, visit deerparkroofing.com today. That's deerparkroofing.com.
Sean, Chris, both of you began your head coaching careers here at Xavier, but you both left for other opportunities. And Sean, I'll start with you. You left to become the head coach at Arizona. Chris, you left to become the head coach at Louisville. But Sean, going back to that decision to start here, but to then leave for something else, what do you remember about that decision-making process? Maybe what you talked to Chris about when he was going through that process himself, and now where you are being back here at Xavier.
Yeah, you know, it's hard to go back in time. Certainly, I was really torn, and it had nothing to do with the place that I was going, Arizona. It had everything to do with, I was here for 8 years. You know, 5 as the head coach, but 3 previous to those 5. People here treated me great. Like Chris said, first year, you know, you take over as a young coach, your record is 0-0. And look, not everybody was saying, hey, we got our guy, or this is going to work out great. But what we developed into was something that we all had a lot of pride in. I mean, we were a tough-minded team. We were a good program. And I think, like all of us that became the head coach at Xavier, you always tried to take it for where you got it, and say, what is it that I can do to move this thing forward? That's become increasingly more difficult as now we're in the Big East and the success of the past has been attained at so many different levels. I mean, Chris did arguably what I think is the hardest thing to do in college basketball, and that is be a 1 seed. You're a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. That's reflective of a 32-game, 6-7 month years of recruiting to be one of the top 4 seeds of 370 teams.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so difficult. And everyone's going to remember, well, what did you do once the tournament began? And that works both ways for coaches, right? Yep. Sometimes you could be the 12 seed and get to the Elite 8 or Sweet 16. Sometimes you're the 1 seed and it doesn't work out. But to be a 1 seed, so the point of the very long-winded answer here is you have so much pride in being able to inherit the program, be responsible for moving it forward. And if, in fact, you accomplish that, it's not easy to say, I'm out. Let's move on. Like, you become attached to Cincinnati, to Xavier University, to the great people that work here. And you know what else? To your players that you convinced to bring here, that you coach, that have worked really hard. When it's time to leave, it's not all what perception is. Oh, he's leaving. It must be easy for him. Nah, it's not. So it was very, very difficult. The fact that I did it back then, I tried to do it for all the right reasons, and there's always, the pluses and minuses of doing it. But one thing that I will say, in the 13 years that I was gone at Arizona, I never lost respect or appreciation for Xavier. Some of it was easy because, Chris was here and people that I really care about were here, but I never lost that. Like, I always inherently followed Xavier really closely, respected Xavier, and we're talking about the 2 times that we matched up, right? So that always remained inside of me. But to leave here was very difficult, not because of the place that I went to, but because of how strongly I felt about this place and in the city.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I was in a place that I was devastated that we lost to Florida State. I mean, we had Trayvon and JP and Swann, for 4 years. And, I had opportunities before that, but it just felt like with those guys, 1 seed, felt like everything was rolling. The game was I don't want to say in hand. That's wrong, because obviously it wasn't. But just thought that the year before we were in the Elite 8, this is sort of our destiny. And the next thing you know, it's just, you look at it, Karam Canner and Swann and those guys with tears in their eyes in the locker room, and it was the hardest time I think that I'd been through as a head coach. And then you're faced with that decision like within 48, 72 hours. I think a lot of things were misinformation out there that, I had something going on for so long with Louisville. I mean, it's so far from the truth. And for me, Sean had said he was here for 8 years. I was here for 14 straight.
Right.
14 straight. And, felt like at the time I wanted to take on that challenge. I think retrospectively you could say, hey, it was the wrong decision, but I don't ever look at it like that. I look at it like those things shape you. Just as I went through my knee injuries when I played here, I went through 2 ACLs and a third when I got done playing, that if those things hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't be the man or the person that I am. And so, going to Louisville was a decision more about the next challenge. Had I known that the NCAA was never going to come out with a decision for 4 years while I was there, the decision probably would have looked differently. But I don't have regrets. I love everything about Xavier. I felt like we pushed ourselves to as far as we got, and it was just disappointing at the end. And I think that probably left a bitter taste in a lot of people's mouths. But for me, it was about the next challenge, and who knows what my next challenge is beyond that. But it was a hard decision. But at the time, I felt like it was the right one for me.
But if you look at how many years you spent in Xavier, as a player, 2, 3?
3. 3. I had to sit out a year.
Yeah, 3. You were the director of ops with Skip for
2,
so you're up to 5. You were with me for 5. Now we're at 10, and then you're the coach 9. I mean, when you're at a place,
and I think in that time we went to like 17 NCAA tournaments in 19
no doubt.
Years.
I was going to say that. There's a stat that came out that since the creation of the NCAA tournament as a 64-team field, and then it became 68, which I believe is in the 1980s.
85.
1985. From 1985 until this moment, we're talking ranked the most total wins, not wins in the NCAA tournament, but from
Just
game one all the way
wins.
to the end of the season. And I think our program is right at number 10,
11.
number 11. Think about that.
That's incredible.
I think more than any stat, if you want to just talk about the true history of this place from a basketball perspective, to be able to say that since 1985 should make any player, any coach, anybody that's affiliated or a fan of Xavier basketball to be able to say that. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, and the current head coach to have the weight of the world on his shoulders to keep that streak up.
It is what it is.
Well, I mean, you're at this point, you're the all-time winningest coach here, but
He's gonna pass
you're
me.
right on the heels.
Yeah, I know.
Right on the heels.
He's going to pass me.
Yeah, well, we'll see. That's a tall order for sure. But no, Chris did. He really did an incredible job here. I remember being at Arizona in my first year there, and we inherited a real change over from maybe the previous 3 or 4 years, and then I showed up as kind of like the fourth coach in 4 years. Almost doesn't sound right? The fourth coach in 4 years. But, we were going to try to get one foot on the ground and see where it went as a new staff at Arizona. And I would watch the next year a lot of guys we were together with, and we had a great group coming back. Jordan Crawford joined the team, and Mark Lyons joined the team. And watching them, I remember I watched the game against Kansas State. Double overtime or
Double
triple?
overtime,
Yeah,
double.
it seemed like quadruple overtime. It just went going on and on. But they were getting ready to play Brad Stevens and Butler in the Elite Eight to go to the Final Four. And I remember saying, like, man, I think Chris is going to go to the Final Four in his first year. Man. But that was a great team.
Oh, well, yeah. And I think, again, maybe I'm wrong, but I think if you would have been here, that might have kept Derek Brown one more year. Could be wrong.
Yeah.
But regardless, that team was
really good.
A talented team and a very focused team. And had we been fortunate enough to move past Kansas State, we would have played Butler, who we lost to with the whole clock episode. I think our guys would have been loaded for bear, and who knows. But
look, the one thing that I thought back to when we were talking about this is when it all ends and you're in the NCAA tournament and the game ends and only one team will end as the winner, how does it feel? Like in that locker room, like when you look at your players and it's really undescribable, isn't it? I mean, to some degree. Sometimes, though, it's almost like joy from the perspective of, look, we got as far as we could.
Right.
This is an amazing season. Last year for us was like that, to some degree. We got back to the tournament. We're in the Sweet 16. We lost to a good Texas team. Man, we had a great run. You guys should be proud.
Yep.
You set the tone for a lot of great things. And happy for you, proud to be your coach. And, man, let's just enjoy all of our hard work, right?
I felt that same way when we lost to you the first time.
Yeah.
Arizona, I felt that way when we lost to Kansas State, as hard as it was to see Jason Love and those guys that were wearing the uniform for the last time. But I felt that way. And there are other tournament moments, I'm sure you've had them, that, Wisconsin, in St. Louis, just complete horrible locker room, just the devastation. Same thing against Florida State. And it's just, as my old high school coach said, the sun will come up tomorrow, but you never feel like it's going to.
Yeah, but the reason why I brought it up is my last game the first time, which should have been your last game as the assistant coach, you became the head coach next year. We lost to Pitt in Boston.
Yeah.
And it was the only
Brown's
time at
foot.
Xavier, I mean this, that in that locker room, as hard as it was, that word joy of but we accomplished so much, fellas. I'd never had that feeling of joy. And I only give you that because, to me, it says a lot of where the expectations went to and the tone that was set. No. I'm not going to give you an ounce that this was good enough. We can do better. Like it was almost like I think when you talk about moving the program forward, and I don't know if that's the healthy response, but I think like when you talk about that next year's team, that actually was how I think you guys would have felt, simply because you were going like Elite 8, Sweet 16. We got everybody back. No. We deserve to be here, and the expectation now is that we're going to be here and we're going to break through. And then when you get in that mode and it doesn't happen, and that takes on a whole new dynamic, you know?
The Sean Miller Podcast is proud to partner with Payroll Partners, where you're not just a number. That means providing a best-in-class HR and payroll experience that was built on award-winning technology and live support customer service with a dedicated payroll specialist who's just a phone call away. You shouldn't have to choose between technology and customer service. At Payroll Partners, you get both. Payroll Partners is locally owned and operated by a proud Xavier alum. For more information or to request a free demo, visit payrollpartners.net. That's payrollpartners.net. Welcome back to the Sean Miller Podcast. Sean, we were just talking about what it's like to not be in coaching and to be removed from the game, and where you were at that point and now where Chris is here, and how you see the game.
For me, and Chris and I would say the one difference between the two of us is he's much more well-rounded and has other interests. I can certainly be accused of being one-dimensional. My wife would be the first person to bring that up. But when you are single-minded and one-dimensional, which I would consider myself to be more in that field, when a game is taken away, or a team, and it's the first time ever you don't play assistant, head coach, and it's like you don't have a season. You're at Thanksgiving, you're like, shouldn't I feel stress of our players' practice, or when's the next game? How about Christmas break? Are they all going to return? What's that first practice going to be like? When all that disappears, it's a different feeling. And I think what I got back to is, look, I love basketball. I really do, and I'm not going to walk away from it. Like, I really love the game. I do. I loved playing it. I love everything about it. The pressure of winning and all that, that's something I'll put over here. But just the sport itself, I refresh myself of, I love the game. And that's why I coach. Yeah. And I think that's the healthiest way, and that's, I think, the most realistic way I can bring in context what it felt like to not have a team or have the sport.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Sean. I mean, I love the game. I absolutely, from the time I, started playing in the third grade to now. I mean, Sean will tell you, even if I go in a gym or walk by an outdoor hoop, I'm not just going to walk inside. I'm going to shoot. I can't get it out of my system. And so the oddest thing is to go from 24/7, where who didn't go to class, who do I have to call recruiting wise, what's the next set play we have to practice plan. I mean, just 24/7 to like zero. I mean, it's like driving a car 100 miles an hour and then not just gradually stopping at zero. Has been just surreal, like life-changing, and so I don't think you can truly appreciate it, because, listen, everybody works hard, people have jobs, but like our job never really stops. Even when you go on vacation, you're worried about like when I get back or somebody get in trouble. It just never ends. And that part for me, to be honest, to get away from it for a while, has been very refreshing. And I think, you talk about recharging your batteries or getting in a different place. I needed to get away from that. I didn't need to get away from the game of basketball or being part of a team. That part's been really hard. Fortunately, I've been able to follow my daughters and love to watch their teams, but it's not the same. I'm just a volleyball dad with IMG or Kiva or Flagler across my chest. So who knows? I've tried to be a soccer coach for my son. He played football this year. I don't know anything about football, so I just sat on the sidelines and I teach him basketball. But who knows where that will lead for me.
That's the other thing that's different between us, Chris. Like, where my three sons are, in life versus your family. Your family's a lot younger. So, I almost feel like, Braden is a senior at Arizona. He's finishing. He's going to graduate. Cameron is with us here at Xavier, and he graduated from Arizona. Austin is an attorney in Denver. He went to law school at the University of Denver and graduated from Arizona as well.
It's crazy because when I was coaching under Sean, like his kids were third grade, fourth grade. And I've got a third grader who's actually going to come to your practice today. And so it's different when your kids, are older and out of the house, and we just sort of have both at this point.
So, it's like, hey, now that you don't have the game or a job, you get to spend more time with them, and they're kind of looking back at me like, I'm good. Like, when are you gonna coach again? Like, what's your next step, Dad? Like, I always felt like they're looking at me like, no, you're not gonna just like hang out and play video games and like you need to come on, let's go. I almost felt like they were giving me one of those like, come on, and what's the next step here? Which is interesting, right? Because it makes sense based on where they are in life, and they have a different.
My girls are right behind me, pushing me to coach again. And I will if it's the right situation. It's interesting because I watched Joe Flacco with the Browns. I know John Fan will be excited. Talk about his experience now as the quarterback, where his boys are old enough to appreciate what he's doing. His boys are following the NFL, and now it's like Dad is like throwing passes in the game, whereas before they were 3 and 2 and didn't really know. And I feel like that's how Braden, my son, would be if I got back to any game that I've ever coached prior to this. Like he's facing the wrong way, eating pizza or with the band during the game. So I feel like he might actually watch a half or two if I got back into it.
Yeah. Most crushing loss that I ever experienced, and I think there's about 5 or 6 that are really close, is losing to Ohio State in that second round of the NCAA tournament when we were together. Greg Oden and Thad was the coach at Ohio State. And it really had nothing to do with Thad being the coach at Ohio State. They were a 1 seed, and they ended up losing to Florida in a national championship game. But that game was over. I mean, it was going to go down as a Sweet 16 appearance and one of the great victories ever for this program and university. And it unraveled in such a bizarre way that, I mean, if you played that out 20 times, I don't think it would happen twice.
I think Cage was 8-8 or 7-7 from the foul line. We had just had a timeout before he went back on the floor and had 2 shots. And it's like, as a coach, Sean's not going to say, hey, if he misses one, just to put pressure on the guy. Obviously you changed your philosophy. I remember that day, he's like, I'm never not fouling ever again. Revisit the Greg Oden shove, all that. But that bus ride back here, what was the quietest I've ever been on a bus. And I remember Withrow or somebody was playing a district title championship game here, and we pulled up to the Centos, and I just felt like a zombie. I could not believe what had happened 2 hours ago up in Lexington. It was down in Lexington. That was a hard one.
But again, it fueled the next year, the next year, and the next year. As again, moving the program, building a program, going from where it is to and I thought, in some ways, probably months later, you said, this must be how it feels when you're growing, when you're adding to what has already been done.
I think it's worthwhile to point out, and I have an appreciation for this, that you guys both started here. You went somewhere else, and now it's like we're sitting in the Centos Center right now on the Sean Miller podcast, and you guys are reunited. It's kind of interesting how life may work out the way that it does sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for sure. And publicly we're reunited, but Sean and I have remain close, and he'll call me and say, hey, that one play that you ran when you did this did that, or just things of that nature. Just staying in touch with him. That's never really gone anywhere. No, I can't say that I'm 20 feet from his office on most days, though.
Yeah.
Well, the Field of 68, they both kind of took us on, and when you look at that team you're a part of, what stands out?
I think what stands out the most is you have to be prepared.
Yeah.
I felt like okay, you want me to be on the show? I'll talk a little bit about college basketball, but you have to be on your P's and Q's. You know, you get somebody's wrong position, you pronounce their name wrong, like you talked about, you throw the wrong statistic out, and that fan base is on you. So it's
question.
like, whatever 2 or 3 games are being played that night, I better make sure I watch them and I know what I'm talking about.
For sure. I got a brand new appreciation for the preparedness and
Yes.
all that goes into, media people covering college basketball and just knowing names, knowing injuries, knowing who's playing well, who isn't, and being accurate with it, because the total information that you have is just so massive. Yet that one fan and that one fan of just that player, just that team, you mispronounce his name or you say, hey, he played well. And no, he didn't even play. He was hurt. I mean, it's like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're unprepared. And then, it really brought perspective for me of how difficult that job is.
Well, and then, Goodman and Fanta and Douster and the guys that run it don't put you in the greatest position.
No, especially
because
Goodman.
they'll
No
say,
question.
okay, who's going to win the ACC? And the moment you give one team, which you have to, right, the other 15 teams in the league are firing tweets at you like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, shut your mouth, Mack. Like, that's why you're not at Louisville anymore. It's like, hey, buddy, I'm just doing what my boss asked me,
And here's the other point. Like, since I've been off the field of 68, those guys always say, you're a little long-winded when you're on there. I'm like, well, if I didn't talk, that means you would have to talk more, and who wants to listen to you? I was trying to actually do my job. And, Fanta, I mean, he's
in heaven right now because the Browns.
The Browns, no, he needs knocked down a little bit. No question. He needs knocked down.
He's great for college basketball.
It'll
though.
happen.
He really is.
Knowledgeable, passionate, hardworking,
Yes.
super talented and funny, and he's fun. I will say that group right there. You always remember those that were good to you when it would have been easy to not be good.
Yeah.
They were always there for me. I'm forever attached to those guys, and we had a great time. And there's some moments during that year that it was some of the funnest times for me. And it, again, back to the game, it kept you connected to the game, and I'm sure you feel that way.
I totally feel that way, and I have an appreciation for the relationships I have in college basketball. And when you're not in it, you're not talking to those guys all the time, and it's amazing to me. How many coaches, whether they're assistants or head coaches, actually, watch the show at midnight. And sometimes I'm sure they're maybe listening to the podcast on their way to work the next day or whatnot. But, it's kept me connected with some of those relationships I have in college basketball.
Well, Coach Chris Mack, thank you very much for being here today on your birthday, taking some time here to be here and to be back at the Cintas Center and to be a part of the Sean Miller podcast. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Coach. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Coach.
Appreciate it.
Bob Nungy still remains the one and only person that's turned us down. And, we've talked. It was hard for him and I to talk after that for a while, but we're starting to repair the damage that was done by him doing that. But he's on crutches. He had an ACL injury, and he's post-surgery. He's doing better, but we'll see where we go from here. But, he's the one guy that didn't take up the offer.
Thanks, Coach. Appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for watching the Sean Miller podcast. As always, make sure you subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, and you can follow us on social media at Sean Miller Pod. And if you're listening to this in audio form, you can find it on all major podcast platforms. Again, thanks for watching.
This has been the Sean Miller Podcast, presented by Deer Park Roofing, with your hosts, Paul Fritschner and Adam Baum. Join us again soon for another episode with the head coach of the Xavier Musketeers, Sean Miller.